The content provided in this video is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. For medical advice, please schedule an appointment with one of our Hope for Healing providers or the appropriate medical professional. This material is the property of Hope for Healing and is not to be shared or replicated in any way without written consent. Thank you.
Okay, so we are going to get started. Abigail, thank you so much for joining us and just kind of diving deeper. So your name is Abigail Kruppstadt.
Sure
Any
is.
relation to Dr. K?
Yes, I am indeed part of the infamous Kruppstadt clan. As you can tell, I am the second oldest out of the four Kruppstadt daughters. For anyone who doesn't know, Dr. Kruppstadt has four girls, and I'm one of them.
Yay. Okay, so if for those of you joining, if they've come to any of our cooking events, Abigail and I have done two amazing cooking events. And the reason why I think this conversation is so amazing is that as the lead health coach, we're going to talk a lot about how the practice has incorporated health coaching as really a part of the healing journey, right? So it's not like this side thing. But also, I think so many of our providers have already had this lean into what is a crunchy mom, or they've always had this propensity towards health. But if I remember correctly, Abigail, that was not y'all's growing up life, right?
Oh, definitely not. It was not.
Okay, so before we get started on what led you on this journey to become a health coach, just what were Abigail's formative growing up years? How did that work?
Yeah. So formative growing up years, it's funny, this is the first thing that comes to mind is we were just kind of, standard American diet, which is a big no-no in the functional medicine world. But we were having a great time. Dr. K was working at Texas Children's. My dad was working at a law firm, and my childhood growing up years were just spent outside, adventuring. I was a big, all for imagination and just having fun, laughing. But I'm outing Dr. K here, but we would go to Burger King and Wendy's and McDonald's every single day. And get the Diet Coke and the 20-piece chicken McNuggets and French fries. Yeah, and we were doing pretty okay. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So you were doing okay, but when did all of that really, and I know we're going to talk to Dr. K really about where that pivot happened for her, but I think, so we talk about this a lot in group coaching. Functional medicine isn't something we're doing to our children. So you are one of those children that kind of had to go from being I got chicken nuggets, me and Abigail will have conversations of remember goldfish? And we have those moments. So what helped you kind of transition into that process, or what made that change necessary for you to take on as a lifestyle, not only for yourself as a child, but then what came on as an adult?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're so right in saying that functional medicine is not something we try. It's not, another therapy or intervention that you hear about and say, oh, I'm going to try this for 6 months and see what outcomes I can get. It's something that the longer you do it, the better you become at it, and it just becomes a part of your lifestyle. And consistency is really key in seeing the profound results that so many people have seen with functional medicine. So going back to your question, I did say we were doing pretty okay, but that was my perspective during that time. I was just happy-go-lucky, playing in the mud at the park every day, eating my Burger King, Hershey's pie thing, throwback. Those were so good. But really, I got sick all the time. I had eczema. Almost every holiday I would get sick. It's like my immune system was just constantly under fire and dysregulated, and I would get strep all the time. But just the fun of life kind of drowned that out. But that right there is kind of a peek into genetic predispositions.
Right.
So one of the things as a health coach, whenever we have a new patient join the practice, we want to build a relationship with them, hear about their story. Something we look at as antecedents, or kind of like history, genetic predispositions. So right off the bat, you know, even though I was doing okay, it was clear that I had some genetic vulnerabilities, that I was at risk for autoimmunity.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to that timeline, whenever you first meet with a health coach, we go over antecedents and then triggers and mediators. So like I said, I played outside all the time. I knew I had some genetic predispositions. And in high school, I just started to develop a lot of neuropsychiatric symptoms. So in real time, that looked like just extreme depression, kind of like a quiet hum of anxiety under the surface. You wouldn't have met me and thought this is an anxious person, but inside it was a mess. Suicidal ideation, eating disorder tendencies like orthorexic behavior, super picky, OCD. Yeah. And so those started to develop in high school. But what breaks my heart and why I resonate with so many of our pediatric patients is all the symptoms that I just described are kind of like classic textbook PANDAS, or pediatric acute neuropsychiatric disorders associated with streptococcal infections. So those strep infections and mono and the flu, those little infections here and there had triggered this immune dysregulation. And going back to what I said about how that breaks my heart is I just looked like a moody teenager. My Dr. K, she is on Governor Abbott's council for PANDAS now, but at the time she had no idea that that is what I was dealing with. So it kind of got written off as moody teenager behavior, going through puberty in high school, junior high. And so that was kind of the start of me taking a step back and in hindsight seeing, okay, something wasn't right here. And at the same time in high school, I just remember being so depressed and like fearful. And again, in hindsight, after doing my own timeline, I kind of traced that back to like there was mold growing on the walls and the portables of the high school I went to. And, we just don't take into account how profound of an effect our environment can have on our mental emotional health, because during all this time I was really suffering mentally and emotionally. I really didn't have any will to live, but physically I was performing. I was at the top of my basketball team. I was the fastest one of the youngest ones. I was killing it in track and field. I was a cheerleader. But all the while my immune system was under fire and I was dealing with severe chronic infections. And this is the story I hear from so many parents and patients I work with, is something changed overnight, or my son or my daughter just isn't who they used to be, and this isn't them, but they're kind of being written off. So that was going on.
Well, before you dive quickly, before you dive, I think this is super interesting, and it is something that we see with our parents a lot, patients a lot, and our parents and just everyone actually, is something that there was. So we talked about your like childhood years, right? They're fine and they were great, but like now you've just replayed back the timeline, which is the beautiful thing about being a health coach, right? Is being able to walk us line. Well, you just actually played back is that like we have as a society been like, well, eczema is normal for children.
Right.
Like, oh, this is normal, right? And so we go into, oh, everything was great, everything was beautiful. But again, the beautiful thing of the timeline is to go, well, actually, that is not to say or devalue the beauty that you remember, but it's also to go, but was it optimal? Like,
Yeah.
was it actually where we could? And then we transition into your like next phase of life, which is why it's so exciting to talk to you, is that it would have been, and honestly, where what I love so much about Hope for Healing, no shame, right? It would have been so easy to go, that's just a moody teenager, right? And nobody would have second guessed it. Nobody would have looked at it in a different way. And I think that beautiful transition really leads to why functional medicine is such a journey for
Yeah.
people in going there. So you can continue.
Uh,
But I just thought it was such a beautiful arc and what so many people experience of it was okay. It was
yeah.
fine. It was great. Actually, it wasn't fine here, but I was doing so good in so many other areas. And then we find ourselves in this like adulthood space and like becoming adults to go, actually, nothing is fine. Like, and then we were like, oh, but I want this pill to make it all better fast. And it's like, no, this has been a journey for you.
Yeah, these are things that have been accumulating over time, and it's going to take time to
Mhm.
restore balance and function and kind of look back in order to move forward. Yeah, it's so true. It can be so challenging to kind of flip that instant gratification, like this one therapy or one thing that you do is going to solve everything. Is that's just not reality.
Right.
Um, yeah, but so one thing I want to throw in there too is during this time, whenever I was just mentally not doing well, I was diagnosed with clinical depression by a counselor. And I'm all for counseling. In fact, that's a huge part of my healing story a little bit later on. But it's so important to look at us as holistic beings because I could have gotten all the counseling in the world at that time. And I don't know how much it would have helped because the main issue was purely a pathogenic infection in my body and immune dysregulation. And I needed clinical intervention. Um, but anyway, so that was high school. I left high school and did dual credit at Lone Star College and started community college. Um, and things were actually really great for a while. Spirituality is something that's important to me. I just kind of started a new chapter in regards to spirituality, I guess you could say, and was doing really, really well, but still had signs of immune dysregulation, still was battling depression and eating disorder tendencies and these OCD behaviors and obsessions and kind of like chronic fear. But I felt like I could kind of acknowledge it for what it was and then respond and say, okay, I'm not going to make this my identity or live into it, but it's still there. So it was a constant battle. And then at 20 years old, I had been dating someone for 4 to 5 years. I think we'd known each other for 5 years and dating for 4 years. And I was engaged and happy as I could be. At the time, I thought I was happy as I could be. And that engagement got broken off pretty suddenly and tragically. And that was the start of really what caused me to kind of lay everything out on the table and say, what can I do to get better? So after that engagement got broken off, I consider that a trigger. Everyone has traumatic life events. And it's interesting. A lot of times I'll meet with patients and we go over their timeline, we look at the triggers, and that's the first time someone is validating that whatever they went through was a traumatic life event. And they should not expect themselves to be fine and just be okay and functioning properly without having been able to grieve and process and, like I said, go look back in order to go forward. So after that engagement got broken off, I just experienced profound grief, as we're all probably going to experience in this life. I lost my period for 2.5 years. I lost so much weight, which led to a lot of issues regulating my metabolism. And I developed what's called I'm trying to think of the name of it, like POTS or kind of like an adult version of PANDAS, just where those symptoms are exemplified. Dysautonomia, that's what I'm trying to think of, where your central nervous system is just completely out of whack. Things are not functioning how they're supposed to. So your temperature is off. You can experience numbness and tingling and tremors. The left side of my face started drooping. Yeah, just everything was completely thrown out of whack. And so it took me about 6 months to get back on my feet mentally,
Yeah.
emotionally, to where I could even process the loss that I was experiencing, and start the actual grief process of working through it and responding to what had happened. Um, so I started getting to a pretty good place mentally and emotionally, but I was left with like the wreckage in my body, the wreckage of this traumatic event. And so I had all these symptoms. I was in pain all the time. And something that's pretty well known is a lot of times whenever you experience trauma, it can lead to thyroid issues. And so the first thing Dr. K and I tested was my thyroid, and she diagnosed me with hypothyroidism. I was lethargic, so exhausted, in a lot of pain, could not think straight, was gaining weight even though I was doing all the right things. So we started treating my thyroid, and that did not do it. And then at the time I was working at the clinic, and I noticed that more and more people were being diagnosed with Lyme disease. And I actually told my mom, I said, hey, I think we should rule this out. Um, Especially because this is another thing that I find fascinating. Whenever I started going to community college, I was an avid runner. And I remember one day my left knee swelled up like so big. And I remember Googling Lyme disease, later on down the road whenever I suspected it, and seeing this image of a really swollen knee. And I was like, that's interesting. So come to find out, I have Lyme and Babesia and likely Bartonella. Um, and that was kind of like, that's the root cause. But it's fascinating because, I grew up playing outside, rolling around in the mud, climbing trees. So I was probably bit by a tick at that time, but a lot of the symptoms didn't manifest physically until my immune system, that traumatic event was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back on my immune system, where it kind of just gave out. And it's like I had no immune function whatsoever. So here I am diagnosed with Lyme and chronic inflammatory response syndrome. I know I have pretty vulnerable genetics, and PANDAS. So that is when I took a deep dive and really started to embrace the whole lifestyle of functional medicine. One of the best decisions I've ever made.
That's amazing. Okay, so you mentioned, so the order of the practice, for those of you who don't know, we go lifestyle, genetics, medical. And so what did those like first steps of going from, again, having the life, and though by this time Dr. K has made that transition and she's working in functional medicine, you're working in the clinic, but where did it come from? This is something I know about, to this traumatic event really happening and cascading, right? Really cascading all the tiny things that have been built up, turn into like, what were some of those first lifestyle steps that you were able to implement?
Yeah, what did it look like to actually implement this whole life change?
Yeah.
Because it's like,
Especially after trauma, right? So your body is now on fire. You're not thinking straight. You have like actual pain. Like I feel like so many times what is so different with what we do is like, we are addressing your emotional, mental, spiritual, all of that pain, right? So how did you start going on that journey?
yeah. So, I remember, being a young woman, really just with dealing with weight gain. I was like, Mom, this is not cool. And just having such hard issues with such a hard time getting a hold on my metabolism because I was working out. And it's fascinating again, because I was eating keto, come to find out my genetics, I do not thrive with the keto lifestyle. So I was kind of setting myself up for failure there. But it started with looking at my genetics and taking, as far as supplementation goes, taking one capsule every day for about 3 months because I did not swallow capsules. I was like, I'm not doing it. But I think what you're asking and looking for, and what I think is actually one of the most important things up front, is the lifestyle, because food is medicine. And if you're not eating anti-inflammatory or using food as medicine, and you're taking all these supplements, they're going to counteract each other. And it's not a super efficient use of your finances.
Right.
And so with Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, if you continue to eat dairy and gluten, you continue to form antibodies against your thyroid gland, which can lead to hair loss, which can lead to more dysregulation and like early onset of memory issues, just, I mean, more imbalance and dysfunction, and potential celiac. Even though before I could eat gluten and dairy and I didn't notice a huge difference, but Dr. K said, if you don't do this, it could be really detrimental. And so the first step for me was transitioning to gluten and dairy free, which is no easy task. And we have such a mindset of doctor tells you to do something, you should be able to start doing it tomorrow and do it well. But I think functional medicine is synonymous with behavior change. And if we look at the trans theoretical model of change, there are all these stages of change and so much science and studies to back it up, and how regression is part of the journey. And how if you don't make these changes in a way that's actually sustainable, or make them in like small incremental steps that are matched to your actual ability and where your heart and your mind are at, you won't be able to sustain them. In fact, with coaching, there's so much research and so many studies that have come out that if you don't make changes in a way that's realistic, only about 10% of people maintain the changes that they make. And in 2 years, they're back to where they started or worse. So it's so important to make changes with the mindset of, this is going to be a permanent change and something I want to sustain and enjoy. So I started with, I ate a lot of pasta, surprisingly, because I don't eat like any now, but I started with just replacing my typical dinner with chickpea noodles. And then I did gluten-free bread, dairy-free yogurt, and just kind of slowly chipped away in doing these clean swaps. And as I did that, I noticed I started to feel better. And once you start to feel better, our bodies are so intelligent, and they won't even want the things that you used to want anymore, which I don't usually tell people up front, because that's the last thing you want to hear whenever you're going through withdrawals.
Yeah. Well, and then it's not realistic because your body is going to so want it right now.
Yeah.
So we can't even visualize an idea of not craving it.
Right.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I transitioned to gluten and dairy free, started to feel better, especially mentally. It's interesting because so many people think, if I take out gluten and dairy, that's to address the GI symptoms, maybe the joints. But for me, if I eat gluten or dairy, it manifests mentally. My OCD, ADD, ADHD, even like the whole body image issues start to come up for me because of the neural inflammation that it causes, as opposed to any kind of stomach issues or GI discomfort. So that was kind of a fascinating thing that I learned along the way. So I did that. And then incorporating things like breath work and Man, I can't say enough about what genuinely practicing gratitude has done for me. Um, I think gratitude can be kind of a taboo in the health world sometimes, because it's some people hear that and they're like, toxic positivity, you just want me to put a band-aid on my suffering. Um, but it's fascinating because whenever you actually practice gratitude, and you're genuinely thankful for what you have, and you can reframe hard things, to look at them in a more positive light and find the positive in them. Scientifically, that actually activates your hypothalamus, which is responsible for mood, body temperature, metabolism. Yeah, energy, and your vagus nerve, which is responsible for your autonomic, nervous system function. And so I can notice a difference whenever I take time in the morning to practice like in silence and solitude and practice genuine gratitude. And in the evening too, it helps regulate sleep. I notice a tangible difference, coming from someone who's dealt with chronic illness for at least 10 years. So gratitude is part of lifestyle. The movement
Well,
piece. Go ahead.
so before we go into there, I think the difference in what you're saying isn't slapping a label on something that is hard or good and hard and messy and calling it good. It's a space of like authentically coming to like, and this is what I think I really love about the group coaching is that that's a piece within the group coaching.
Yeah.
It's the piece of understanding that like we can't go from these dark thoughts to going, oh, we're full of joy, we're happy, we feel loved. And it's like, no, those things aren't true. And so we go through, I mean, those things are probably true, they're just not felt. And I
Right.
think so. How do you, going through everything that you've been through, before we dive into the other lifestyle pieces, how do you, one, how have you just incorporated that personally? But two, like, I know just because I know you, that that's a huge piece that you really genuinely love walking our patients through
Yeah.
to where we comes from toxic positivity to authentic gratitude and
Mhm.
really finding a space where you can be at peace in the midst of the pain, right? That we are not saying, oh, we're trying to get you so pain-free, but that we can, which we go, right? We want you to be pain-free. We want you to be living your most best, amazing, optimized life. But the truth is that is such a journey that we have to come over here and say, we want you to feel joy, peace, loved,
Yeah.
and all of that in the midst of. So what was that journey like for you? And how do you like leading people in
Yeah.
that journey?
Yeah, man. So it's it's funny, because I feel like I can't separate gratitude from grief. Like I can't compartmentalize, uh yeah, I can't compartmentalize gratitude, without holding, grief in tandem, because in order to get to a place of gratitude and genuinely living in a state of ease and contentment and appreciation, um, you have to acknowledge and move through the weight and the gravity of what you've gone through and what you're experiencing. So it's funny, I remember one of the first times that I had this like embodied experience of like the biochemical, positives of gratitude. Because whenever you express gratitude, it releases dopamine and gives you this mental high, and things start functioning how they're supposed to. It was when I went through a grief inventory worksheet that my counselor had given to me. Um, and it had three columns, and it said what I lost, what it cost me, and how I feel because of it today. Um, and so I went through that. And if we're, looking at that through a health perspective, um, grieving, let's see, at the time, grieving like the ability to go out and hang out with friends and eat and drink whatever I wanted. Um, that's what I lost. What it cost me was feeling like I could fit in. Um, how I feel because of it today, really sad. Um, like it's like life isn't fair. And that's where that reality piece came in. It was like, okay, yeah, life isn't fair. And so with all that to say, I added another column and kind of looked at this from a different light and then realized and kind of processed and said like, okay, where can I find how do I want to respond to all this? Because I felt like that was missing for me. I was like, okay, how do I want to respond? And then it was like I had an epiphany and I was like, I have such great community around me and people who love me dearly. And I actually have the ability to, I'm feeling nervous about this communication, about this lifestyle. I can actually take some time to plan my little script of what I want to say and how I want to communicate it in a way that's authentic, that's not making my illness my identity. And I can do that. It was like I had the superpower. And then to acknowledge I
So
have
good.
amazing friends and family who will come alongside of me throughout this and be there for me, and people who are so accommodating. But then, of course, the question I had to ask myself is, do I value myself enough to, step up and communicate what I needed and my needs? Yeah, so that was a long-winded answer
So good.
um, to your question. But I think whenever it comes to gratitude, I think it's first acknowledging the gravity of what you've been through and grieving, walking through that, and then finding how do I want to respond and being grateful for how you can respond. That we have the ability to respond to our circumstances and not just live in a constant state of reactivity to them. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Well, absolutely, because it comes from the authentic place of we are not ignoring in order to be grateful. And that was kind of one of those things for me, to step into this space of saying, hey, it is real. Like the grief is real. And that is where it kind of comes from toxic positivity to saying, oh, but it's okay. Right. And I feel like if any of y'all have either are going through this with your child or going through this personally, you've been given the cute cliche quotes that people find off Pinterest and like told them to put a sticker on top of that and then to make, and whether that's because they really desire to make you feel better or they're just trying to protect themselves, that comes from that whole nother place. But what you're saying is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that in order to really dive into this piece of gratitude, you had to experience the grief. You had to acknowledge that it was there. And I think that is one of the things that kind of separates the two between toxic positivity, again, with Mental Health Awareness Month being in May, as well as Lyme Awareness Month being in May. We're kind of talking about that whole, we don't want to live in this toxic positivity and everything, but we do want to live with authentic gratitude and going in that journey. And so, yeah, I think I love it. You cannot separate gratitude from grief. They can't be separate. And I think that's just a beautiful part of that journey. And so the other part of it is that, like, I know that you mentioned this, is that community piece, which is something you and I are super passionate about, is that community piece. So what did that kind of look like whenever, so I know we're kind of like trying to be aware of the time, is that your community piece of like incorporating, yes, we incorporated health coaching and we can walk through that journey, but then we have this new piece that is group health coaching, which really puts in the community. So can you take me through that journey a little bit?
I'd love to. It'd be my pleasure. Yeah. So I think it's important to understand the why before walking into the what. And so there's all this new science, and I'm kind of a science girl. uh, there's so much research about the effect that community has on your health. There are these places around the world, I think there's 6 called blue zones, and there are all these studies conducted to see, well, so a blue zone is a place where people live the longest. People are living the longest and they're thriving. They're not just surviving. They're 108 years old, 120, thriving, walking up hills, having a good old time. And one of the consistent factors that was a part of these blue zones is community, regular community, and sharing what is going on and allowing people to walk through life with you. I think that in the West, we've adopted this mentality that if I share something with someone, there's an expectation that they need to give me a step forward or help me fix it or do something about it. And we've lost this beautiful space of, hey, this is what's going on. I'm not expecting you to do anything with it, but will you just be with me in this and support me through it? And so, with that said, part of the reason we developed group coaching is number one, community has a profound effect on our biological systems and our genetic makeup. So many studies show how literally living in community improves your health and well-being. So that's the first part of it. The second part is I was the lead patient care coordinator before I stepped into a health coaching role, and I would meet, I mean, the patients that we have at this practice are incredible. Like some of the most spectacular people I've gotten the privilege of meeting and knowing and getting to walk alongside of. But I was heartbroken because I would go into a room after an appointment and it was like all these parallel stories of people walking through the exact same thing, but doing it alone with no one to support them. And I could see it was like a physical weight of I'm doing this alone. There's no hope for me. I have to do all these things, like a physical weight. And I could see it on their face. And I was just like, man, if we could only connect this person and that person, like they would hit it off. They'd be so happy. They'd experience results quicker because there's, again, so much science and behavior change about when you do something, make a change in community, your results are accelerated and sustained better. And so group coaching, with all of that to say, is really just a space for individuals to come in regardless of what they are walking through personally, because everyone's story and journey is different. Everyone has different genetics, different conditions, different life circumstances. But it's a place for people to come in and get to share what's going on and develop a care plan together. And at the same time, it's literally like medicine. Like this time where you get to meet with people and share is literally like medicine to your biological systems, because what it does to your function, it releases dopamine and serotonin. And on that note, another thing I want to share is just the power of vulnerability. I had mentioned, I lost my period for 2.5 years. And in the relationship that I was in, I had experienced some pretty profound abuse. And I had never shared that. And once I shared that in community, within 2 months, alongside of clinical intervention, within 2 months, my hormones were regulated. And so the power of sharing things and being vulnerable and authentic and not keeping it held in, that you can't not, that is so linked and correlated to your functioning optimally. So this is a space for parents to meet with other parents who are going through the same things with their kiddos, for individuals to meet other individuals and to form community. So our hope is that this is a space where people can experience accelerated results, build great community and lasting relationships, and then hopefully foster those relationships outside of Hope for Healing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So excited.
Yeah, that's exciting. I think also, I just feel like another piece that we see. So you saw the loss, I feel like, that everybody was experiencing, and the loneliness that everyone is experiencing. And you saw a problem, right? And so coaching wasn't just something, and you can really speak into this more. Coaching wasn't something that we were just like, oh, it's the new craze, right? Because that's really hard. Now that we see it everywhere, it can feel like we're just jumping on the bandwagon of everybody else. So what I hear you saying is that you actually saw the need in our patients. And honestly, a lot of the conversations that we've shaped group coaching around are conversations that we've had directly with our patients.
Well, I mean, I would say, yes, I saw the need in our patients, but honestly, Lauren, before I saw the need in anyone else, I saw it with myself.
Mm,
I mean, it's one thing to have Dr. K as your doctor and, be fire hosed with very helpful information and appointment. It's another thing to live with her and, have constant access to that fire hose. Um, I mean, what a blessing, but also I was so overwhelmed and I lived with the doctor. And so I was just left, it felt like holding all these pieces of a puzzle that I had no idea how to put together or how to put them together. And the overwhelm and stress of that was debilitating for me, even though I had the self-efficacy and the skill set to do it. It was so overwhelming. And the thing that I think is really important to acknowledge is coaching is not for people who have this like deficit in being able to implement anything or lack knowledge and skill, who are not, go-getters. Coaching is for anyone and everyone. It's about implementing and sustaining behavior change.
right.
I mean, I've coached Dr. K, who in my mind is one of the most brilliant people I have the privilege of knowing and being her daughter, but anyone can benefit from coaching. It's not for people who need a little extra help or support. Um, and, we have so many amazing individuals. I get to learn so much from our patients, but the stay-at-home moms who being a mom is more than a full-time job. I mean, it's
Mhm.
so much. And then we have our other, individuals who are CEOs or, um, work at companies, and coaching is beneficial for all of them. Yeah, we want to support them in whatever walk of life they're in, and just come alongside of them and bring another perspective and be a place where they can get support, even though they don't feel like they have to have it.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
yeah.
amazing. I think that one of the things that you're saying is super huge. So I've had the opportunity of being in all of our current cohorts, and I'm so excited to be partnering with you in this coming cohort that will be starting in May 31st. But what you are saying is so true, because I feel like there's not a single person that's been in the cohort that isn't such a high achiever. We have nurses, we have counselors come in, we've had parents of people who have been hitting the grind with functional medicine. But I think those people are so frequently carrying so many plates. And I
Mhm.
feel like group coaching comes in, and like as coaches, we get to come in and we're like, we're going to hold the plates, but then you're going to decide which plate actually needs to be dealt with right now. Like we're going to come in and we're going to come in and we're going to like under you and hold things for space, but to go, maybe this can go on the shelf. Maybe
Yeah.
this isn't right now. Maybe this is something that can happen. This is not forever. No. And I
Yeah.
think what you're saying is so brilliant, because when we have all these brilliant minds and brilliant thoughts, I think it also comes to a space of understanding that just because you're brilliant doesn't mean that you can't ask for help,
And
and like having that support system.
yeah, and I think, coaching is completely contrary to the conventional medicine model. I think I would venture to say most of our patients are people who have had to figure things out on their own. Um,
Mm,
they have figured things out on their own. They're the most resilient people I've ever met in my life, the most creative and resourceful. And the idea of having another voice speaking into their journey is the last thing they want to do. Is okay, I have another person telling me what to do, but that's not what coaching is. It's helping them work on what they want to work on, how they want to do it, but just to get faster and hopefully better results.
absolutely. Well, because yeah, I think that's such a good point. It's your decision. Like
Yeah.
there's like so many different like facets, so many different options, but it's your decision, and we're coming along to partner with your decision, encourage you in your decision.
Yeah.
And I feel like so many people lose that in
Mhm.
conventional medicine and in those conventional ways, is to like, we ask you more questions than we would ever try to give you advice, because we think that you're brilliant,
Mhm.
and coming in that. So what did the process, like, how did you become a coach?
Yeah, I became a coach kind of on accident. I wanted to become a counselor and get my LPC, And in the midst of dealing with all my health issues and going through counseling, and just really experiencing how we are holistic beings and we need a holistic approach if we're really going to thrive. Health coaching kind of brings together physical, mental, emotional, and the spiritual aspects of healing. And so I found the Functional Medicine Coaching Academy online, and everything that it touched on was all, it just articulated so well all of the pain points that we were experiencing as a practice and what I was personally experiencing having a mom as a functional medicine doctor. And I just thought, man, this is the answer to like taking off that weighted blanket of sorrow and stress and implementing a care plan that I saw on the backs of so many patients that I spoke with. Because coaching is also, we're trained in positive psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy. So I just went for it and went through the Functional Medicine Coaching Academy. And that changed my life and really accelerated my own healing journey. And I've gotten to see so many other people experience the benefits of coaching as well, which has been such a pleasure and joy. So, yeah.
That's amazing to kind of see how the journey and really what I think I love that you touched on is super important. We are not anti-counselor. We are not any of that. We feel like those two people should come together, right? That we come together and we learn from each other, and that support system that you needed both and. It wasn't one or the other. It's that we understand the connection between the two, like the two places. So when we talk about lifestyle, it is encompassing of a lot of different things. Can you list off what lifestyle really means before we wrap up?
Lifestyle. Let's see if I can name all of them. Okay.
I feel like I wish I had the list to go like check.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got movement. We've got nutrition. We've got hydration, environment, relationships. Trying to think what else. I would say stress is one of them.
Oh yeah.
Stress for sure. I think that covers the gist of it. Can you think of any others?
I can't. Those are so like I feel like we gravitate towards our favorite and the most we've had to work on, right?
Yeah. I'll say too, like just to define lifestyle, I mean, it's a modifiable lifestyle factor is anything you can change about the way that you live and you behave that doesn't require clinical intervention. So my mindset is another one, relationships is another one.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing that you're touching on is there's a lot in our life that we cannot control. But so much of the modifiable lifestyle things are the things that we actually have a say in. They are not things being done to us or forced upon us, but they are things that we can step into. And I know that some of like the trauma and relationships, but we do have a part in it. We have a part on whether or not we keep those relationships and how we foster those relationships in safety. Okay, before we wrap up, because this month is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we're going to be having an amazing event later on that I'll be wrapping up with. But how do you support your mental health?
How do I support my mental health? Great question. Community is actually a big part of mental health because for me, because I can tell if I'm isolated for too long, because I thrive being alone, like in silence and solitude, but isolation is a whole nother thing. So making sure that I have time with community, it's like I walk away with a new perspective and a fresh pair of eyes. So community, taking care of my body. So I've said it once and I'll say it 100 times more. You can't compartmentalize your psychology from your physiology. So what you do physically affects you mentally, and what you do mentally affects you physically. So actually eating well is huge for me. Because I notice I have a bite of something with gluten in it. And the next day I'm like, I feel like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. So eating well, moving my body, and staying in community. Spirituality is huge to me. Um, but I think what takes the cake is just having a close group of people that I can communicate about what I'm going through with without the expectation of them um, without the expectation of them solving my issues, but rather just to be there with me as I navigate them.
Absolutely. I think that the piece of what I think I love most about Hope for Healing and all of our providers are really shining in their areas. And what I'm really excited about is diving into like group coaching with you, with your heart being for community and fostering community, not only for yourself, but because you so have seen the impact of what community means to you, that you want to give that piece to other people in with the whole goal being healing. What I love about you, you said, I'm a science girl. And so I think about that is that there's nothing in Hope for Healing that we haven't backed with science. Like we have science backing for all of the decisions that we're making. We aren't just trying to make people feel better as oh, we just want you to have all the warm fuzzies. No, we want them to be authentic. We want them to be a pace that is also a big deal. And another piece of that, group coaching, for those of you who are listening that may feel like, man, that's a lot of things she does for her mental health. What I love about group coaching is they don't all come at once, right? So we're teaching you how to create a sustainable plan of this is what we're going to implement this 90 days. The next 90 days, maybe something else, and finding the balance.
And just to add to that, I think the beauty of who we are as beings with everything being intertwined is if you do one thing for your health, you may think it's for your physical health, but it's going to affect you mentally and emotionally. It's going to have an effect on your neurotransmitters. So just doing one small thing, even telling yourself at the end of the day, like, I made it through today. I was exhausted. My mind was all over the place, but I made it through today and I didn't give up. Just one thing can affect you physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, which is just, I think, so comforting because we don't have to compartmentalize.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Abigail, for your time. I really appreciate your authenticity and just everything that you shared with us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me and for all of your beautiful questions and input. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. And if guys, you don't know about it, later on this week, this Thursday, I'm going to be speaking with Dr. K and another Q&A with Dr. K, where we answer your questions that you've submitted in. If you don't know what we're talking about, you can send an email to hope@gettotheroot.com if you want to be included in our email list, or you can just go to gettotheroot.com and you can sign up for our newsletter. And it's like a pop-up, so it'll be right there. Another event that we're having is the last Friday in May. We're going to be talking about neurotransmitters. We're going to get to the root of anxiety and depression. As we're saying before, we love partnering with our counselors. This is not something that we are saying. If you are going to a counselor, we want to encourage that relationship consistently. But we also know, as Abigail shared with her own personal testimony, is getting to the root of the situation to be able to partner with the counselor better is just so much more growth faster, right? So thank you all so much for your time, and you have an amazing day.